Well, I'm back from my vacation, and as you see, I have cut my hair, cut my beard, and I am ready to go. So for you four, I, I think it's four, it could be 10, but let's say four loyal listeners, thank you for sticking in. Today we're going to advance the story a little bit more. We're going to go from Roman times to a couple hundred years. But first, I want to start with a story. Now, this story you probably heard. Every kid growing up in England, every kid growing up in the old colonies of America can recite the story. It's the story of a British king who defended England against the Saxon invaders and established a kingdom that stretched from Britain to Ireland to Iceland to Gaul to Norway. It was run from his capital of Camelot. As a king who was helped by the magician Merlin and held a sword known as Excalibur. A king who sent his knights out to find the Holy Grail but lost everything through the betrayal of his best friend Lancelot, who cuckolded him with his queen, Guinevere. It's the story of a king who went out to battle his nephew, and he killed his nephew, but then he was mortally wounded and buried on the island of Avalon. But the story said that one day, when England needs him most, he will come back. Well, as most stories, the truth, well, the story is better. Yeah, that's sad. But, hey. So last time we talked about how England became Romanized. We talked about how the countryside started seeing villas that rose in the Roman style as early as 75, but it took until about the 3rd century for it to trickle down to the lower classes. And we talked about how the farming products that made England and how England became the empire's breadbasket, and it was a supply point for many items not seen elsewhere in the empire. And we talked about how taxes were the way that Rome kept its thumb on England and exploited England. And we examined the reasons why Rome had to do this. After all, most of their army was in England. Everything that happened in England affected in some way the empire. As I said, my wife loved this. As I said, if you farted in England, the empire smelled it. Well, we also discussed how when Rome left in 410, England kind of fell apart into different areas, and some areas were taken over by the old tribal leaders. They had become landowning families, and now they took over. And some formed into self-governing administration units that led by people that were named magistrates. And other places, mostly where the invasion had originally taken place, they formed themselves into small kingdoms, where the trouble often came from across the sea, and therefore they hired mercenaries to defend them. The northern parts of England, where Romanization had never really grew deeply, either reverted back to the Iron Age living, or they grouped themselves around commanders of the old Roman army, and they named them chiefs. So who would take control over England, or would England simply be one land controlled by different kinds of people and never be united? I think you know the answer to that story, but let me tell you how it all took place. The story starts in 430. There was a leader of the Confederacy of Small Kingdoms, a man named Vortigern. And he called in some Saxon mercenaries to defend his kingdom because he was being invaded by the Picts of Scotland, who landed in Norfolk. And he also had barbarians from Ireland who were landing on the west coast within reach of his kingdom. Now the trouble was made worse because the Picts, they painted their ships and their bodies blue, like the water. So if you're near the edge of the water, you weren't sure, is that a pick or is that water? Oh, I got stabbed. Darn it, I guess it was a pick. Well, too late now. But, Vortigern, he had to do what the Romans had been doing in the last years of the empire. He had to call one barbarian tribe to help fight other barbarian tribes. And out of fear and out of urgency, he called on the Saxons to help him fight. The Saxons came. According to historical record, there's only 300 of them that came, packed into 3 ships, but more likely it was more. But they came, these mercenaries known for their ferocity and valor. These band of warriors who fought under the war chieftain, who worshipped the sun and worshipped the moon, who adored Woden, the god of war, and Thor, the god of thunder, they came to England. These Saxons who practiced human sacrifice and drank from the skulls of the enemies, who shaved the front of the heads but kept their hair long in the back so they might seem fiercer. They came to England. But then again, evidence shows that they were already here. They were living in Kent. And they lived on the island of Thanet, the Thames estuary. But now more came, and they were placed on guard in Norfolk and on the coast of Lincolnshire. They guarded Icknield Way. They defended London. They worked with the remains of the Roman army, and they mixed with them in York and invited their friends, help us out. We have Picts here. And eventually the Picts said, enough's enough. They went back to Scotland. But now there's trouble. It's always trouble. Because the Saxons were here. They were here in large numbers. And guess what? They didn't want to go home. But, they said, okay, we'll leave. You pay us. Money makes the world go round, remember? You pay us, and we'll go home. But the native English said, well, we have no reason to pay you. The Picts are gone. The Irish are gone. Why should we pay you? And they said, okay, well, fine. You don't have to pay us in the coin, but how about give us some land? And the native English said, no, get out. Go home. Go home. Home. And the Saxons didn't go home. They attacked their hosts. They started in East Anglia, and they spread down the Thames Valley. They took over many of the towns and countryside areas where they'd been stationed. They seized the large estates, and the English, who lived on the estates in high manor, suddenly found that they were slaves of the Saxons. The Saxons called more their friends. Hey, buddy, look. Come to England. These people are rich and they're weak. They didn't use the phone, by the way. But they still called. And the Germanic migration came. And they came. And they came. Angles from Schützwig. Saxons from the River Elbe. Frisians from the northern coast of the Netherlands. The Jutes from Denmark. They came. And they settled along the Thames. And the Trent. And the Humber. And they stayed. The Jutes settled in Kent, Hampshire, and the Isle of Wight. The Saxons, they took over the upper Thames Valley. The Frisians, they scattered over most of southeast England. They took London as their capital. And the Angles, they settled in eastern and northeastern England. And they brought their clothes and their culture with them. They came in small tribes, small communities, ruled by one leading family. And some were resisted, but some were welcomed. Others were simply accepted. They had a working population. They had no real love for the Romans. They had really no love for the native English landowners who ruled them for generations. They were accommodated. And according to the best evidence, eventually, these Germanic invaders made up about 5% of what we call English, maybe even 10%. But they did not kill the people they lived among. They didn't replace them. They simply lived with them in peace. Like eggs mixed with pancake batter. Pancake batter. Note, have some pancakes. Anyway, they came because back home other tribes were pushing them out. And they came because their home was being sucked into the rising sea. Evidence shows that the northern European coast was sinking in the sea at this time. Now the revolt of the Saxons was a blow to prestige and authority of Vortigern. He's overthrown by another Romanized English leader, a man named Ambrose Aurelianus, or Ambrose Aurelian, who led a counterattack on the Saxons and for 10 years fought them. And in 490, the English won a great victory at a place that is known as Mons Bananacolis, which we have no idea where it is, but it's one, a very interesting name, and two, it's somewhere in a place near Bath. Okay. Now the man who led the native English in that battle is the man we know as King Arthur. Most likely he was a simple leader from a military fort at Cadbury. where they make chocolate-covered eggs. Cadbury, and he became a great shining example in the Middle Ages to English, and his story is now mixed in with romantic ideas. Sorry, boys and girls, but the truth is out there. Now, the English survived. The Saxons, they were here to stay. They still controlled Norfolk. They still controlled East Kent, and they still controlled East Sussex. And perhaps this is why the Vansdyke was built, to keep the Germanic horde from crossing into central and southern England. On one side, small English kingdoms. Other side, the Germanic tribes, their warrior leaders, living in what had once been the most Romanized parts of England, but now have become barbarian land. Now, some places where the Romanized English had once called home were now empty ruins. Other places being used as markets and places of authority. For instance, the Saxons set up a market outside the walls of London in today's Aldwych. But inside the walls, London was still a place of royal residences and place of public ceremonies, like the Romans never left. The countryside was pretty much left as found. The new arrivals respected the old boundaries. They set their structures up within a pattern of small fields and dry stone walls, created hundreds and hundreds of years before. They formed groups that honored the boundaries of the old tribal kingdoms that existed before the Romans came. Their sacred sites, these are the sites where the Druids and the ancient English had once worshipped. Just like where the native English still controlled the churches set on places where once Druids and other worshippers had once called home, all embraced the ancient past. The old is still new, in a way. And for about 3 generations, this is what occurred. One side, native English. The other side, Germanic people, but it cannot stay that way forever. This is still a land of young men and young women, and if you reached 35, you were an old man or an old woman. The leaders were all brash and vibrant and energetic and thoughtless. And by 550, the Germanic people, they began to push west. They wanted to explore productive lands that they had not yet touched. Now, there are many reasons why this happened suddenly, but one reason is that throughout Europe at the time, the bubonic and pneumonic plague had spread from Egypt to the old Romanized West, and England, it was the natives that were struck down rather than the Germanic settlers. They may have been immune, we don't know why. But we know that from about 4 million people in England, the population dropped to 1 million. And all this land is now vacant, with few left to defend it. So the Angles and Saxons, they moved west. They created the Anglo-Saxon civilization. Now, one of their leaders was Calian of Wessex. By 577, his group had reached Cirencester and Gloucester and Bath. And by 583, he reached the Midlands and deposed all native kings along the way, and this is a pattern throughout England. The pressure was growing on the native Celts of Somerset and Dorset, and as a result, these people fled to modern-day France, where their leaders took over vast chunks of land and welcomed being parts of the ancient Gauls, after all. In France, they formed a region of Brittany, and they kept their old tribal alliances and the memories of home. And some of them came back. Well, William the Bastard, William the Conqueror. Oops. No, he's a bastard. Okay, let's get it. Let's just tell the truth. William the Bastard, but that's the story for another time in about 3 weeks. So in the end, the natives were so mixed and mingled that the term Angle or Saxon ceased to mean anything at all. And eventually, everyone would be called simply English. But that's a slow process. It took 20 years, maybe more. And in fact, the process did not really begin to end until 1282, when Edward I took Wales and the natives started to die out. But the Celts are still found in Cornwall in the 16th century, and the language of the Celts was still being spoken when George I was King of England in 1720. Years! Now the Germanics tribes, settlements, they took the form of small folk territories made up of groups of warriors and marked off by rivers. So for instance, the followers of Hiesta created Hastings. The large number of small tribes, they gradually aligned to defend or fight as was needed. Over-kings emerged as leaders over tribal chiefs. By 600, the kingdoms of Anglo-Saxon England started to enter recorded history. And ranks started forming as well, based on systems of burdens and obligations imposed by the warlords and their entourage. At the bottom were slaves, and above them were landless workers, and above them free heads of households, and above them were the thegns, or the noblemen, with divisions in their rank, as well as each rank having more privilege as one rose. So, for instance, if you murdered someone, your penalty was graded according to what the victim was worth. If you killed a noble, it was worse than if you killed a slave. It's a harsh, divisive society only made possible by the continued exploitation of those under you. But the native English endured the change of leadership, but most working the land as generations before had done. They paid taxes and they paid tributes to the local lord, has been done by their grandfathers to the Romans. They didn't care. This is their life. The Angles and Saxons, they didn't wish to change much of what Roman had imposed because there was a simple reason. They needed native English to do what had been done for eons. Work the land. Work the land according to traditional methods. Make the crafts. Sell the crafts. Make us money. Now, in the first years, there may have been a form of separation between invaders and invaded. The Germanic word walla means Celtic or Latin speaker and came to mean serf and slave. The name of Wales comes from the word walla. So we have Cornwall and Walton, Walsall, Walcott. The natives survived, although their voices are lost to us except in those few names. Now, the invaders may have had their own religion, but they did not drive out Christianity. Early churches have been found in London, embedded within Roman edifices. The same can be said in York, in Leicester, and Exeter. Churches located in other towns and, of course, in areas the Germanic tribes did not reach, Christianity flourished in the small monastic communities as well. They were appearing at this time. And one of them is on top of Glastonbury Tor, where King Arthur is said to be buried. I thought he was buried in the island of Avalon. Hey, the story's better. Sorry. But England as we know it is slowly being formed. For instance, in the north, the settlers lived in East and South Yorkshire at first. And they mixed with the old Germanic troops who welcomed them and helped them form the kingdom of Deira, today's Yorkshire, from the Humber to the Tees. An England community was established at Bamborough, where the castle still stands, and a great Anglo-Saxon cremation cemetery is still found outside the village of Sancton in the East Riding of Yorkshire, where as late as the 19th century, villagers are still using pots and urns taken from the place. The native tribes, they tried to contain these powerful Germanic settlers, but in the end, it wasn't successful. By the end of the 6th century, according to that great historian, the Venerable Bede, the settlers under King Aselfrith had conquered many territories and people, driving them out, replacing them with their peoples, or subduing them, making them pay tribute. Now, the reason that the natives are unable to fight back is the tribes and kingdoms are divided among themselves. A house divided itself against itself cannot stand. As Abraham Lincoln said, as the Bible says, the old kingdoms fell as the war bands slowly moved west and north. Few in number, yes, it's true, but soon patrolling a vast territory of moorland and hills with scattered farms and cottages. This was a world of warriors who wore beads and collars of amber. It was a world of councils of war. It was a world of battles with banners held high by opposing forces. A world of crows and ravens eating the dead and flying high above the battlefields. A world of feasts with mead and sweet wine, of hounds and hawks, drinking horns passed around in candlelight, human wolves and human eagles led by lords doing all for the glory and a bit of something they could call home. In 616, King Aselfrith died. He was replaced by Edwin as king of Northumberland. Now, Edwin would be powerful enough to conquer the Isle of Man, to invade North Wales, to occupy Ainsley. Now, he wanted to be king over all of England, and he never managed to do this. But he did have such a fierce reputation that people were safe to travel all over what would become England without fear of being attacked, because they knew that Edwin would come down on them like the wrath of God. Pax Edwania, I guess. Now, he did fix up the principal highways that were neglected after the Romans left, and along each road was a system of stone cisterns, which was designed to collect water from nearby fountains. And each cistern were cups of brass. So the drinking fountain is English. And very old, my friends. Now, we do have two things that Edwin left us. First of all, his fortress in Scotland became known after his death as Edinburgh, or Edinburgh. Recently, evidence of his palace has been found in the small village of Javerin, along the ruins of a great hall, a temple which became a Christian church, an open-air wooden theater where there are concentric rows of seats before a raised platform. A large enclosure was also there to hold animals before they're killed and eaten in great feast. And Northumberland, however, is not the only place to have great kings. In East Angles, the land was taken within its territory was today's Norfolk and Suffolk and the Isle of Ely. It was once the land of Boadicea. And yes, I just pronounced that wrong. I'm sorry. But this is the land where she'd come from. But now the Anglo-Saxons ruled it under one of their great kings named Redwald. In this land, outside of Woodbridge, Suffolk's been found the burial site of Sutton Hoo, which believe Redwald is buried. And though this mound has been dug in for centuries, the ship itself was not found in 1939. The boat is 90 feet long, and within the central space was found a helmet of Scandinavian style, a coat of mail, a battle axe, a sword of gold fittings, spears, and a shield ornamented with the shapes of birds and dragons. And also found in the ship was a scepter, crowned with a bronze stag, a great gold buckle, gold claps in the Roman fashion, silver bowls, coins, cauldrons, a lyre. Another mound on the site, recently dug in, has been found inside a skeleton of a warrior and his horse, and there are at least 17 other mounds in the area. But no body was found in the boat itself. It may have been meant as a send-a-pith. It's more likely the body was placed in a wooden coffin and over the centuries was eaten away by the acid sand all around. We don't know much about Redwald. We do know that nothing really changed under him. The poor were still poor. They still led lives of unending labor, eating poor food and wearing rough clothes and living like their ancestors in earth houses top of wattle. And the rich who surrounded Redwald would have lived lives of hunting and war. They have ate their fill of pork and venison. They would drink to excess. They would painted and tattooed their faces. They would dye their hair bright colors. They wore clothes adorned with gold. But the poor still lived lives of sickle and plow, pick and spade. Sad. And that's only a couple kingdoms, and we still have the kingdom of Mercia, which stayed in the Midlands, and Essex, and Sussex, and Devon, and Cornwall. The Anglo-Saxons did not only fight against what was left in the native English, but also among themselves of territory. And interestingly, the only place that there was no general takeover was Kent. Kent was first settled by the Saxons during the time of the Romans, and while the Jutes did come in later, what the Romans had established stayed intact. The people here did not fight back. They accepted their fate. They named their towns here Canterbury and Dover. The Christian churches are built on sites of the old temples connected by prehistoric roads. And unlike elsewhere in England, where the invaders took large tracts of land and placed it on the great lords in Kent, the land was marked out into individual farms and hamlets, where people worked together and lived in peace with each other. They lived in a type of freedom that was not found elsewhere in England. That freedom would come back to hunt the English in 1381 and in 1483 and 1984. Kent is also the first place where Augustine landed to bring Roman Christianity to the Anglo-Saxons who ruled England. Not to bring Christianity. The land is already Christian. Augustine only came to spread the word among the leaders of the land and impose, in a way, Roman rule to the English once more, although it was a different kind of Roman rule this time around. Now, it take about 100 years, so eventually all of England was under the thumb of Rome again, but this time it was the Romanized Christian church, what we call the Roman Catholic Church. The old Anglo-Saxon churches were built on sites of temples. They were torn down, they were rebuilt the way the Pope in Rome wanted it. And it must be stated the English bishop and the English priests and the monks and the missionaries, they weren't happy. They did not want Augustine to come to England to evangelize the Anglo-Saxon oppressors. They wished to eradicate the Germanic overlords, not be brothers with them. These men had been trained in Celtic Christianity. They didn't like seeing Rome come back to haunt them once more of its churches, bishops, and administrators ruled from some faraway place. But they lost the battle of faith. And the Roman Church had become an English Christian church for about 1,000 years. And Celtic Christianity died out. Christianity brought peace and unity to the various kingdoms of England. After all, as the Catholics say, a people who pray together stay together. And that's important because on the horizon were peoples who weren't Christian, but who saw Christian England and then saw the land and saw the loot and lusted for it. Those people were the Vikings. And next time, we will examine their history in England. So stay tuned. Stay thirsty, my friends.